In the historic city of The Hague, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, convened for a momentous summit in late June of 2025. This gathering was far more than a routine diplomatic meeting. It represented a fundamental shift in the very architecture of Western defense. For decades, NATO has served as the bedrock of transatlantic security, a military alliance binding North America and Europe with the principle of collective defense. An attack on one member, as stated in its founding Article 5, is an attack on all. This summit, however, was set against a backdrop of renewed geopolitical tension, a protracted war in Ukraine, and persistent pressure from Washington to redefine the responsibilities of its members, setting the stage for a truly transformative agreement. The central outcome of the summit was nothing short of revolutionary. After intense negotiations, all 32 member nations formally endorsed what is being called the Hague Defense Investment Plan. This plan commits every member to a new, ambitious target, spending a minimum of 5% of their gross domestic product on defense and security by the year 2035. This figure represents a dramatic leap from the previous 2% guideline, a target that many members consistently failed to meet. The new consensus signals a sober recognition among European leaders that the security landscape has irrevocably changed and that a greater share of the burden must now be borne by them. This new financial commitment is designed to be comprehensive. It is not merely about buying more tanks or building more fighter jets, though that is certainly a part of it. The plan strategically allocates the funds, with 3.5% of GDP earmarked for core military spending. This includes maintaining and expanding the number of active soldiers, investing in cutting-edge military hardware, and bolstering cyber defense capabilities. The remaining 1.5% is designated for security-related infrastructure such as fortifying energy grids, securing transportation networks, and ensuring resilient communication systems that can withstand a sophisticated attack. It is, honestly, a holistic approach to national and collective security in the 21st century. The primary catalyst for this historic shift is the perception of escalating threats from global adversaries. For years, European capitals have watched with growing alarm as Russia prosecutes its war against Ukraine, demonstrating a clear willingness to use military force to redraw borders. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte has repeatedly warned that Russia's ambitions may not end with Ukraine. Simultaneously, the alliance is increasingly looking toward the east, viewing China's rapid military modernization and growing economic power as a long-term strategic challenge. These dual pressures have created a consensus that the era of the peace dividend following the Cold War is definitively over. The architect of this new 5% mandate is undeniably United States President Donald Trump. For years, both during his first term and on the campaign trail, Trump has vocally criticized NATO allies for what he sees as their failure to pay their fair share for defense. He has long argued that European nations with robust welfare states should not rely on the American taxpayer to guarantee their security. This summit saw his persistent demands finally come to fruition. His administration applied immense pressure, with his national security advisor having previously threatened to squeeze allies who did not increase their spending. Trump's transactional approach to foreign policy made it clear that American security guarantees were conditional on European investment. This pressure campaign was not always diplomatic. President Trump singled out reluctant nations, most notably Spain, threatening punitive trade measures if they did not fall in line with his proposed spending target. He warned that their economies could be blown right out of the water if they refused to commit. This blunt style, while jarring to many European sensibilities, proved to be remarkably effective. It forced a conversation that many leaders had been avoiding for years. In the end, faced with the prospect of a weakened alliance or damaging trade disputes, member states chose to embrace the new target, creating what Trump now describes as a fairer, more lethal NATO. However, the agreement was not reached without significant internal debate and dissent. Spain, whose geography places it far from the Russian border, was the most vocal opponent of the 5% target. Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez argued that such a high level of defense spending was incompatible with maintaining his country's social welfare programs. He contended that Spain's current contributions were sufficient for its security needs. While Spain ultimately agreed to the plan, its reluctance highlights a persistent division within the alliance. Countries on NATO's eastern flank, like Poland and the Baltic states, have long exceeded the old 2% target out of immediate fear of Russia, while those in the south and west have felt less urgency. This dynamic forced NATO's leadership, particularly Secretary General Mark Rutte, to perform a delicate balancing act. Rutte developed a surprisingly positive rapport with President Trump, famously and perhaps strategically referring to him as "Daddy" in a move widely seen as flattery designed to keep the American president engaged and supportive of the alliance. By publicly praising Trump's leadership and framing the 5% plan as a victory for the American president's agenda, Rutte managed to secure a commitment that strengthens the alliance as a whole. This maneuvering ensured that the summit produced a unified front, even if it papered over some significant underlying disagreements among its members. The vast sums of money unlocked by the Hague Defense Investment Plan are intended for a complete modernization and reinforcement of Europe's defense posture. The core 3.5% allocated to military spending will directly address critical shortfalls in personnel and equipment that have plagued many European armies for years. This means larger, better equipped, and more readily deployable ground forces. It involves significant investment in advanced air and naval platforms, from next-generation fighter jets to new fleets of submarines and warships. The goal is to create a conventional deterrent so powerful that it would make any potential aggressor, namely Russia, think twice before contemplating an attack on a NATO member state. Beyond traditional military hardware, a substantial portion of the new funding is directed toward the domains of the future, cyber and space. The war in Ukraine has been a stark lesson in the importance of digital warfare, demonstrating how cyber attacks can cripple critical infrastructure and sow chaos. NATO allies will now pour billions into developing robust offensive and defensive cyber capabilities, protecting everything from government networks to power grids. Similarly, investment in satellite technology for intelligence, surveillance, and communication is seen as essential for maintaining a technological edge over adversaries like Russia and China, who are also rapidly advancing their own space-based military assets. The remaining 1.5% of GDP spending addresses a less glamorous but equally vital component of collective security: infrastructure resilience. This involves hardening the physical infrastructure that underpins modern society. Projects will include reinforcing key bridges, roads, and railways to ensure they can support the rapid movement of heavy military equipment across the continent. It also means securing energy supplies, protecting underwater data cables, and building redundant communication systems. The objective is to ensure that NATO countries can not only fight a war, but can also withstand the societal disruptions that would accompany a major conflict, maintaining governmental function and public order under extreme pressure. Amidst these grand plans, the question of Ukraine remains a sensitive and central issue. While the country was not offered a direct path to membership at this summit, a concession to accommodate President Trump's desire to keep ceasefire talks with Russia open, the alliance's commitment to Kyiv has not vanished. NATO leaders reaffirmed that Ukraine's path to joining the alliance remains irreversible. The massive increase in European defense spending is, in part, a direct response to the war. A stronger, better-armed Europe is better positioned to continue supplying Ukraine with the weapons and financial support it needs to defend itself, ensuring that any eventual peace deal is negotiated from a position of strength. The landmark 5% pledge marks a watershed moment for NATO, but it also papers over deep-seated philosophical divides that will shape the future of European security. While the final declaration presents an image of unity, the path to consensus was fraught with tension. The stark contrast between the threat perceptions of Eastern European nations, which share a border and a history with Russia, and those of their Western and Southern European counterparts like Spain and Portugal remains a core challenge. The former see the 5% target as a matter of national survival, while the latter view it as a heavy economic burden that diverts resources from domestic priorities like healthcare and education. President Trump's influence has fundamentally altered the alliance's internal dynamics. His transactional approach has forced a reckoning on burden sharing, but it has also introduced a degree of unpredictability. European leaders are now acutely aware that the American security guarantee is no longer unconditional. This has spurred a parallel conversation in European capitals about strategic autonomy, the idea that Europe must develop the capacity to defend itself without relying on the United States. The 5% pledge can be seen as the first major step in this direction. a down payment on a future where Europe takes primary responsibility for its own neighborhood, a future that Washington itself has demanded. For Russia, the outcome of the summit is a clear and unambiguous message of resolve. The Kremlin's foreign ministry was quick to dismiss the plan, with spokesperson Maria Zakharova criticizing NATO for wasting money to counter a fabricated Russian threat. In reality, the massive defense buildup is a direct consequence of Russia's own actions in Ukraine. The invasion, intended to halt NATO's eastward expansion, has ironically achieved the opposite. It has revitalized the alliance, prompted the inclusion of Finland and Sweden, and now triggered the largest European rearmament effort in generations. This new reality significantly raises the potential cost of any future Russian aggression against a NATO member. Ultimately, the long-term impact of the Hague Summit on peace and stability in Europe is a complex question. On one hand, a stronger, more capable NATO presents a more credible deterrent, which could reduce the likelihood of a major war. By demonstrating an unshakable commitment to collective defense, the alliance aims to make conflict unthinkable. On the other hand, this massive military buildup could be perceived by Moscow as an escalatory threat, potentially fueling a new and more dangerous arms race on the continent. The coming years will reveal whether this historic 5% pledge leads to a more secure and stable Europe, or simply a more heavily armed and tense standoff.